Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I talk with Noah Gerding, the new development director at Sholom Foundation. We talk about how he got into fundraising, some experiences as a Jew of color, and asking big questions on this week's Who the Folk podcast. But a quick note before we get going. I found out as we were walking to the conference room where we were recording that I was a close contact of someone who had tested positive for COVID-19. So I wore a mask and face shield for the conversation. If I sound a little muffled, that's why. Enjoy. Noah Gerding, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
So you're the new director of development for the Sholom Foundation. I mean, new enough that the welcome sign is still on your door.
It's fresh.
From your coworkers. How fresh is it?
It is about 7.5, 8 weeks fresh.
Okay.
Depending on what your time of day you start with.
So not necessarily all that new to the job.
No, but still pretty new.
Still pretty new. In the realm of, Jewish communal professionalism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what was it about this opportunity that you saw the posting and you're like, I could do this. This is up my alley.
Yeah, and to be perfectly candid, I actually saw the posting in January.
Okay.
And I had some exploratory discovery conversations with people that were close to my network and the executive director of the foundation, Joel. And the timing it didn't feel right. Just because I was pursuing other things in community that I needed to see through.
Okay.
I'm a finisher. I'm a follow through. I can't leave something hanging, and I can't start something and go a different direction without tying it up.
Okay.
So all of those things that I tied up ended up not panning out, and there was an opportunity I said no to, and then the posting resurfaced, and there was something about it that read differently, that felt differently to me. Yeah. And so I reached out again, and that was in late April, early May.
Okay.
And here we are. So I think in terms of what resonated specifically with me, this move for me was deep. I've done a lot of community work and fundraising work at organizations that work with disabilities or environment or animal welfare, child and family homelessness, youth mentoring. Aging services providers and senior care has always been something that I have yet to learn from and learn with. So I need an element of learning with whatever I take and whatever I explore.
Interesting.
I tend to see things through a lens of the art of the possible, a lens of inquiry. And so, candidly, everybody on my mother's side has been impacted by Sholom community in one way, shape, or form for generations. And I have a current uncle in one of our communities now, and so I think the opportunity just to lean in and learn, and also, from a personal passion, it hit my heart.
Yeah.
It hit my heart deeply.
Well, that's fantastic. And, in talking to people who work at Sholom over the course of my years, not even the 6+ at Jewfolk, but even people whose family who have family here who are impacted in some way, there is such a passion for the organization that once you're touched by that it really is it helps draw you in, is something I've noticed.
It's in you.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah. That was definitely the tractor beam for me out of anything else.
I'm here for a good Star Wars reference. That's fine.
Okay.
That's good.
Fair enough.
That's good.
Good.
So what type of work were you mentioned some of the other organizations. Was there a particular group that you were working with prior, or were you sort of doing project-based work on your own?
Yeah, I came from a wonderful organization on the east side of St. Paul called the Sane Foundation. And the founder, the founder, he's a retired soccer player, Tony. Wonderful, wonderful soul, amazing human. Really wanted to kind of give back in ways to youth that he never had growing up. And so, from food insecurity to in-school, out-of-school academic support, everything holistically that makes a youth and their families' lives whole that was really appealing for me. So I was there for about 15, 16 months or so.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Tony as a soccer player. I'm a huge soccer fan, so I remember
right?
him.
So you know him.
Right, I know him as a player, but, from prior to moving to the Twin Cities about 20 years ago. But now, now living here and being here this long and sort of getting to hear the stories of the work he's done at the foundation and how, personal it's always been to him to get something like this running and doing the work that it's doing it's tremendous.
Right. Yeah. No, it was a blessing, and it was a privilege to be with him, the boards, and the amazing volunteers and amazing staff. And my role really was director of development, but it really was one to build systems for sustainment. And so as I think about what it takes, as I look at my view of fundraising is very lane focused, and what I mean by that is there are lots of supporters that enter through almost like a traffic circle, right?
Sure.
So think about a traffic circle. So there's lots of supporters that enter into that wheel, if you will, or that relationship with an organization through a variety of different entry points. And it's what you do in that center, almost that middle, that makes the other work possible. And so for me, it was one of aligning systems and staffing and talent and capital to ensure that whatever direction the organization goes from a contributed revenue or earned income standpoint, that they had a really great foundation to work off of. And so I did also the fundraising work and the donor work, but also I'm a creator. I love looking at things through a different kind of lens, and I think that there's always maybe a different or a more inclusive or intentional way in which to show up in the work. And so that was a really fun time for me to essentially make that happen for Sane.
So how do you use some of the creativity in this job? Obviously, like you said, it's a different constituency at Sholom than working with youth.
In a community-based organization, sure. Yep.
Right, so it's a little bit different. But with the foundation, though, because you're working for the Sholom Foundation, it's more than just working with like the residents, right? Because a lot of times the foundation work is working with the families.
Right.
Right. So how do you bring some of that creativity from stops along the way to this with a different group?
Yeah, and I think, some context here that I've learned over time is senior care, aging services, as you and probably many of our listeners will know, we're at an inflection point, especially in Minnesota. And I think as Sholom and our partners in community emerge from both pandemic and whatever new way of showing up, what it's going to mean, there's some aspects of, creative storytelling, different kinds of narratives that go into what Sholom does. And those narratives really, what I try to be the bridge to, in addition to donors, goals and needs, are elevating the voices of those that we're serving, or those that are being served, or accessing any kind of Sholom care. And so it's been a lot of creative, I would say, spaces that I've held for program staff, for operations staff, for therapeutic rec staff, and just a different way of thinking about giving, and to let everybody know internally and from a governance model on our volunteers and our boards, like, you're already giving, right? And so when you come at it from more of a lens of abundance and possibility and inquiry, the creativity, I think, is not as stifled as in other places. So yeah.
What was it that led you to the fundraising world to begin with? Because that obviously, you have such a passion for it. It's so obvious, but it had to start from something. Where did it come from?
There's the tactical, and then there's the strategic, right, to fundraising. And so when I think of the more of the tactical day-to-day, I'll back up a little bit. Throughout college, I worked for the Lupien family at a Saturn dealership in Golden Valley. Okay. So I was a service advisor. So one of the main points of contact for customers with vehicles that needed some love. And so from a very early young adult, college-y age, I learned that while cars are awesome, cars are fun, that there's this whole other side to what cars make possible for humans.
Yeah.
And leaning into that human component of life really kind of propelled me down a different path. So after graduating college with a degree in child psychology, I quickly realized there was this whole other world of like intangible things connected to organizations that help those in need. And I think for me, after college, I did some sales. I do not think fundraising is sales. I'm going to put that out here right now.
Yes.
It is vastly different. But I will say that, there's this whole other side of what selling a widget actually means for somebody, and whatever that means, that meaning
right.
is really, to get back to the tactical, that's what always has kept me grounded in fundraising. And I think from the concept, from the intangible aspects, I think the strategy behind what philanthropy can do from a healing perspective has always been center in my life. And I think of, I mentioned that on my mom's side, most everybody has been positively impacted by a Sholom community for generations. My Bubby and Gramps grew up at the corner of Washburn and Plymouth on the north side of Minneapolis, and at my Bubby and Grandpa's Shabbat dinner table from very early on, it was a space of questions and inquiry and compassion, and I think those lend themselves very well to the heart of the explorer in me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And so I think it was rooted back in the day at my Bubby and Grandpa's dinner table in North Minneapolis. But I don't know, there's a few things that I think have drawn me in and have kept me in the work. Yeah.
I mean, there's so much about Judaism. We talk about like questioning, right? Of having those discussions, having the big, the back and forths, right? We hear these stories all the time. The rabbis talk about them in sermons probably weekly.
Weekly parsha. Yeah, right.
Right. In the parsha and the Torah study that they do,
right.
And they talk about it. So I think growing up in that seems very very Jewish. It's like feels like a very like what you would expect almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I would agree, and I think I did just visit my dearly departed Bubby and Grandpa the other week, but the thing that I remember from my bar mitzvah is even like page 809 of the Siddur or something. Like it was the passage that I read for Oneg was like Torah and love, and there was just something about that passage and just that statement of love,
right?
That's a piece, I think, of if you bust out the word down to the etymology of philanthropy, the word philanthropy, it means the love of humanity.
It does?
I believe. And tell me I'm wrong, but
it sounds really good either way.
Well, either way it sounds okay,
yeah.
Right? And so having that kind of, I don't know, lens or tenet to my work, it's made all the difference.
So is this the first time that you've been at a Jewish agency doing development work?
As a W-2 paid employee, you betcha.
Okay.
Meaning I've volunteered. Worked on other committees.
I was going to say, I don't want any employment lawyers listening to say,
no.
"Oh, does he have to sue somebody? Do we have to help him sue somebody?"
Whoa, contract 1099. Uh-oh. No. Yes, the first formal, I would say, professional foray into fundraising for a Jewish-based organization.
After having this career in other places with other constituencies, is it weird? Is it familiar? Is it both? Like, what's it like sort of coming back to to your religious space in this sort of way?
It's lovely.
Okay.
And I guess it's the both and answer.
Okay.
Is it weird? No, other than organizations have, cultures, and when you're learning about, the governance model or the structures or the organization's, the agency structure of an organization, like it's all different. I wouldn't say it's ever weird, but it's different. But the flip side to that is like I always need to be in a place of continual learning, and so I think as I mentioned, I think for a variety of reasons, like this just feels good, like deeply good, on a many different levels.
And I didn't ask that as a place of judgment. I'm just sort of curious.
Oh gosh, did I come across that way?
No. I was afraid that the question came across that way. No. I'm just sort of like, I'm a curious person. I mean, I guess the being a reporter, right? I'm a curious person. Right. I like asking questions.
You're the explorer heart, right?
Right. I like having these conversations. So I always wonder what it is that is it. I mean, I got the sense after talking to you for about 30 seconds before we started recording, it wasn't just for the paycheck. It was because it was a place that you like being, and I'm just sort of I always wonder what draws people in to work, particularly people who work in sort of the Jewish communal space. And I mean, I asked, there's a question that interests me talking to clergy also. What draws them into the rabbinate or the cantorate, right? It always interests me sort of what the drive to bring somebody into this world, which can be wonderful and can be a little, different at times too.
Yeah, agree. And, I think I'm going to go back to that word that I dropped before of healing. And I think for me in my career, I'm coming at the work through a lens of healing and repair, and I'm coming at my own trajectory in my professional life through a lens of healing. And, candidly, the last handful of months and couple years have been really, really wonky for our community.
Yes.
And for nonprofit agencies alike. And so I needed to prioritize a lot of different things, and a lot of things led me back to my faith. Yeah. And it's something that I've never been able to or had the opportunity to blend professionally to a degree before. And so I think that is why it doesn't feel weird to me. It feels very natural.
You mentioned before we recorded that you're a Jew of color, you're a BIPOC, you're an adoptee. How do all of those areas sort of inform your Judaism? Do they inform your Judaism?
They do to a degree.
Okay.
I think that's a really wonderful question. A fundraiser is trying to get words. Yeah, that's a new thing. I think, it's like the trifecta. So as I think about me, myself, and I as a human, like, I'm just one.
Sure.
And I'm not the only one.
Absolutely.
And so, do they inform? Maybe. I don't feel I'm answering this question very well. But they definitely, I don't know. They definitely cradle. Not finding the right word. Draw this out of me some more.
Oh, okay.
Let's go. Let's unpack this one if we can.
Sure, we can.
Yeah, this is good.
It's rare that I stump the person I'm talking to, who then stumps me and tries to figure out the best way to.
That's why this works.
This is great. This is terrific audio. Okay, maybe growing up, did you you look different than your peers in Minnesota? A lot of them, particularly in the Jewish community, like you said, you're not the only one, but I don't know what the numbers are, to be fair, but. Like, I guess, did that have an impact on you then, if you think about it sort of in that respect?
That's a great reframe.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So growing up, I did not grow up, by the way, in North Minneapolis. My mom and when she married my dad, they moved out to a little town east of St. Paul called Lake Elmo.
Okay.
And my dad is now retired, but he worked for 3M for many years.
Oh,
and,
sure.
So that's what brought us out east. So that's kind of another thing is Jewish, adopted, person of color, Lake Elmo in the late 70s, early 80s. Different.
Little bit.
Extreme.
Yeah,
little bit.
These things don't. This is not This is not what you expect out of Lake Elmo.
No, it's not. And so, I think growing up in a preschool or even a elementary or primary school setting, like definitely, I felt different.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know any different. I guess that's a good way to say it. But I felt as one with my peers who did not look like me, who did look like quote unquote everybody else.
Right.
But I think for me, a really formative age was like between 9 and 11. And my folks and I don't have any siblings.
Okay.
Either. So there's number 5. I'm an only.
Okay.
We moved to Seoul, South Korea.
Whoa.
87 through 89.
Okay.
Right during the 1988 Olympics, the Summer Olympics
Yeah.
in Seoul. And so my dad had been working with 3M at the time and kind of helping launch a subsidiary so 3M could back out and renegotiate the partnership between private enterprise and government, and 3M could do it again. And it was supposed to be a longer assignment, but we were done in 2 years. But in that 2 years, not only did I get a love for spicy foods, I really looked at the world differently.
Yeah.
And I had a different level of understanding for, again, the questions, the inquiry, the patience, and maybe even the learning that my peers that, for all intents and purposes, stateside, looked more normaler, it's not a word, but it is now, didn't have.
Right.
And so, that, for me, developmentally, I remember everything, because I was 9 and 10 and almost 11 at the time, and so that was like 3rd and 4th, or 4th and 5th grade.
Yeah.
It's still pretty fresh in my head, and I guess one of the things I always go back to is, the blessing of, I learned about healing.
Mm-hmm.
There it is. I learned about healing and hurt and pain from both an introspective lens at a very young age where I didn't have anybody else to lean on. And then I also learned about it more from an external community, societal level where and I guess from a value standpoint, like that's always been part of me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're beginning to get there with that whole word vomit I just left you with.
I don't realize quite how much I was asking you to unpack there, but I'm glad I did. I think it's interesting because I think the experience is, I think it's clear that experience and everything that was part of it, going to Seoul, being only in Lake Elmo as a Jewish adopted person of color.
Yeah,
I think so much of that time period in your life really does inform what you've done professionally and what you're doing now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the other kind of component I'd add to the whole Seoul, and I went to Seoul Foreign School experience, was all of my teachers in middle school were missionaries. Now, it's an international school,
right,
still to this day, but up until 4th and 5th grade, I never had a non-Jewish, religious, faith-based component to learning and curriculum.
Yeah.
So that was, as we say in Minnesota, real different.
Yeah.
That was real different there. And again, back to, I remember my 4th grade teacher, her name was Rachel Patton. Yes, Mrs. Patton, who ran the class probably like General Patton. Not kidding. I was fourth grade, so there's no trauma there. And then my fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Major, Phyllis Major, my folks were okay with me asking the why questions in terms of religion class.
Yeah.
Because I just wanted to know why.
Sure.
Like, I wasn't, to our faith, like, we're not the only one, and we know that that's, there's others, and that's okay, and there's beauty in that. But I guess it wasn't okay for me to ask those questions at a 9 and 10 and 11-year-old setting. So I ended up failing religion class, but my parents were like, well, you learn from it.
You failed for the best reasons possible. You
well,
asked the
think
question.
So.
You asked the question. Listen, if they're going to fail you because they don't want to answer the big questions, like, that seems like that's lazy teaching. That's not good teaching.
Maybe you're right. No, there's no maybe. You are right. And, as I think of my modern work now of being in community and understanding fundraising through a different lens in our world, I think maybe there's a little bit of that disruptor in me.
Sure.
That I can trace back to, yes, Bubby and Grandpa's Shabbat dinner table, but also Korea and my upbringing. So, you're right. Maybe it does follow.
I feel like if there's anything that could use disrupting, I think there's plenty of things in society that need disrupting. That's for starters, where I think you're probably made for that sort of thing. But I think, the fundraising world, I think, and I say this as somebody who's not a fundraiser. I mean, let me back up. My boss would say we're all fundraisers in our own way. We, JUFOC is a nonprofit. We
You're always wearing that hat.
You're always wearing the hat, whether you're actively soliciting or not. I am the editor of TC JUFOC. I am not the development officer. We have a very talented, the very talented Carly Shapiro does that. And I also recognize that, like, the ways of doing the job feels like they could use disrupting. Like, it feels like fundraising needs new and innovative ways to ask. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay.
And I hesitate only because I don't think this is your intention, but when you say new and innovative ways to ask, yes. But I also think that the industrial machine known as fundraising in 2022, specifically for nonprofit organizations, the small to medium-sized ones, though I'm just going to say that I think there's too many new and innovative and bright and shiny ways that actually distract from the relationship that your supporters have with you. Okay. And as you start to lean into, this is my soapbox, so please stop me, but as you start to lean into all those bright and shiny ways, I think you turn it into a transaction and less than a relationship, and then Noah's turned out, and I'm done. Okay. So, and I'm out, because that's not what I'm about. So I think yes, but I also think it's more in the how donors, supporters of any type, in-kind, volunteer, financial, soft credit, like, does not matter. A gift is a gift. It is a selfless act. I do not care how many zeros are attached to it. It does not matter. The act of generosity and giving is what should be elevated. And I also think that donors are beginning to understand what power means, what wealth means, and what maybe perpetuating inequities could mean from fundraising. And so, from a disruptive standpoint, I think our community is ready for a different level of conversation, but there aren't always the mediums by which fundraisers, organizations, or industries may feel safe enough to have those tough, crucial chit-chats.
One other thing that you mentioned before we wrap up, you had mentioned that you also do podcasting.
I do.
Tell me a little bit about the podcasting that you do.
It's kind of a nice segue from what we were just talking about.
A little bit.
Disruption.
Yes.
And so I am, on the side, I am a coach, a mentor, a guide to other nonprofits that are kind of grappling with these same things that we're dancing around right now, but also how they think about raising revenues through relationship-based meaningful connections. And so, my podcasts that I've either participated in or have facilitated have really started to just unpack kind of what could be better with our work, and why why there may be still an assumption that we're grappling over similar resources, which is just not true. So, so it's called the Fundraising Talent Podcast. I'm a member of a consultancy called Responsive Fundraising, and that's just something that I do on the side.
Okay.
So that's kind of the genesis behind that podcast.
Do you enjoy it?
I dig it. In much the same way that our conversation today was unscripted.
Yeah.
I don't want scripted. I don't want prepared. I think you get to a different place more quickly than if you script something out. And, for me, or any of the small handful of hosts that we have, it's always about a big idea.
Right.
And teeing that up and just having the conversation go where it needs to go in the moment that they're at. That's fun for me. So if I'm asked to do a scripted podcast, yeah, great. But my heart and head are more aligned with the unscripted, the raw, the real.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what fundraisers and organizations really need now, is the actual conversations, not the conversations about something that looks pretty from afar.
And just to let people in behind the curtain a little bit, we're sitting at the conference table in the Sholom Foundation. I know, you're talking about unscripted, and I knew your name and your title.
Yep.
And on the table is, standard office stuff, but a digital recorder, 2 mics, 0 notepad.
Nothing.
So
nothing.
Very little homework done. But
I didn't do anything.
Excellent.
I mean, I showed up.
Right. I mean, I'm here, and that's that. But it's like, this is sort of what I enjoy about these, is that they are unscripted. It is back and forth. It is some banter. It is, unpacking stuff. And I didn't know where I was going with some of these questions when I asked them, but that's
never
sort
do,
of the fun.
right?
But that's the fun of it.
Right.
It's like, you're not on a witness stand, right?
No, and that's the beauty of it. Like,
Right.
You have me. Like, this is me.
Yes. And this is great, and this is why these are fun. Noah Gerding, last couple questions. We're gonna let you get back to your day. Total 180. How we end these?
Love it.
What's your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oi. It remains Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, how come?
I think there needs to be more importance placed on the human renewal, an annual reflection, the human condition, and personal commitments to do what's really good and do things that are a little bit different that get back to what you need to be doing. And so from an annual rebirth cycle, it's almost like I also, so I'm going to take you on a 182 real quick.
Awesome.
Love cars, love cats, all animals, but I also love gardening and digging and tractors and landscaping. Just threw that tractors in there partly because we have a 4-year-old toddler and he loves anything with an axle.
There you go.
But there's something primal and simple about the annual, especially in Minnesota, or Minnesota, depending on where you are, the annual cycle of planting and cultivating and nurturing, and what that produces and bears with some love and care and attention. And so I think of that in the same way as the High Holy Days in terms of what that means for the sense of self, and that's what I always gravitate towards.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And finally, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Well, it's going to be my of blessed memory, and it is the great. I'm just going to preface this by saying my great aunt Naomi made some amazing dishes, but the thing that she always made with the most love for me was kugel. Okay. Now, kugel is a gray area. Well, it can be because there's so many different types.
Sure.
And so I'm not more of the. You could probably split this a ton of different ways in terms of the pure kugels, sure, or the any kind of kugel.
Okay.
And I've really never met a noodle I haven't loved. So there's
we are a people of the carb. So
I love the carb. How can I not love the carb?
Obviously.
Yeah, clearly.
So what is it about? I gotta dive in a little bit here. What is it about your great aunt Naomi's kugel that was really like? Is it again? What is it? With dried fruit? Is it with cheese? What's the? I ask because again, there are a billion different ways to do it, and everybody's answer will be different.
It was like I was eating a lasagna dish of blintzes. Like it was that type of just soft
ricotta, sweet cheese.
Such a sweet cheese.
That's the one.
With just the slight element of crisp noodle.
Oh yeah.
On the top, with the dusting of like you're falling off your chair right now.
Oh yeah.
I mean, So it's that type, and it was so dense, but it wasn't dense to eat.
Right.
Right. Oh.
I'm so hungry.
So hungry right now.
Killing me. Well, Noah Gerding, thank you so much for
thank you.
Joining me this week, for having me in your office, and best of luck as you continue to dig into this opportunity here at Sholom.
Wonderful. Great to be with you. Thank you.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.